what an incredible time we had together recently. It was so fun. One of the big highlights for me to go to Egypt was to know that I was going to get to spend some time with you, and you definitely did not disappoint, which was which was fabulous. And it's such a pleasure to have you here, my friend.
Well, I was honored to be on your travels. It's just your generosity there and your wisdoms that guided that trip were second to none. Epic journey with a bunch of 40 superpowered human beings, and just an honor to be among it all.
It was so fun to be there. I felt like we experienced something very different. And, I've had the privilege, I'm sure you have too, to go lots of places. I mean, geez, you've been all over the world chasing like white lions and everything. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience there?
In Egypt there?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm beginning to be able to tell you about that. I really, honestly, it's in probably the top 3 events of my travels as far as like the amount of information that traveled in over that time was so potent that it just takes I think quite a bit of time, maybe years, maybe lifetimes, to unpack something like that to really understand what it was all about. But I think first and foremost, what I experienced there was one of the most extraordinary permission vessels I've ever been in. Like, it was just hands down one of the most extraordinary moments as a human being, to be able to walk into a space where absolutely anything was going to go. I could express whatever was going to happen to me without fear of judgment or without fear of upsetting somebody or freaking somebody out. And when you walk into a space like that and have that level of license and freedom to express whatever's going to come through, the amount of your own intelligence that you experience is just beyond words. Like, because all of us have, there's a data bank that we have, there's a vague connection to, blocked by the egoic veil. And you really, as a new friend and colleague, gave me permission to go places with myself that I just have rarely been allowed to go or allowed myself to go. And so I think first and foremost is deep gratitude for the wisdom you have, the intention that you set behind those trips to allow people to explore the revelatory relationship that we have to an amazing amount of information within ourselves. So it's beautiful. It was a beautiful adventure, and as spectacular and bizarre and esoteric as the experiences were in the catacombs beneath, the plateau, as much as in the high chambers of the pyramids themselves. It was the humans there that were really a penultimate experience, and I've had the blessing of, now counting so many new friends in my life, and among the standouts, which were so many, Alan Green.
Oh, yes.
Like, what the heck happened to bring that man to the planet right now? And I have just dropped in with Alan. We've had so much fun together since the trip, and I just feel like I've found a new mentor in life in Alan there. So thank you for.
I feel very blessed to have had Alan in my life for the past 5.5 years now. And, it's kind of a funny story about how I met Alan. Do you know the story?
Vaguely.
So I was kind of fanboying Alan Green, and I reached out to him. I'd seen the video that he did on some esoteric stuff related to all 3 measurement systems of the foot, meter, and cubit being embedded in the architectural design of the Great Pyramid. Wait, what? How could this be? Wasn't the meter just invented like in 1799 or something? And this sounds totally bizarre, right? So I kept sending him emails and messages, and he's too busy. Like, he had no time for me. He was busy decoding Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. And so finally one day, I finally got his telephone number from someone. I called him up out of the blue, and I said, "Hi, Alan." I said, "I know you're busy. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm just going to say one word to you, tell you one thing, and then if you think it's interesting, then we can continue the conversation at your, sort of desire and will. Or if not, then we could just hang up and you could say goodbye and you go along your merry way." And so he said, "Okay, what is it? What is it?" And I said, "Okay, so the name Yahweh, what's that mean to you?" He goes, "Yod He Vav He," right? He starts, saying
straight
to me
the
exactly
Hebrew.
the name, the Hebrew name, right? Aye, Esher, Aye. He goes through the whole thing. And then he says, "What about it?" And I said, "Well, have you ever thought that maybe the shape of the characters of Yod He Vav He look very similar to pi to the 7th power and pi times 7. And he's like, okay, you got my attention. And I said, what if it's an equation that's pi to the 7th power divided by pi times 7? He goes, what would that turn out to be? And I said, 137. And he goes, okay, you got my attention now. And then he invited me to his house the next day. I stayed there till like midnight, all afternoon.
Because he had to show you how many times 137 had showed
Oh, yeah. That's exactly right. And for those of you that don't know, 137 is the famous fine structure constant, which has been referred to by the very famous physicist, Richard Feynman, as it seems as though the hand of God has pushed his pencil on this number, but we don't know how he pushed his pencil. It's the most mysterious number in physics. It's the electron coupling constant, the veritable mirror between light and darkness. So the zone of determination between threshold energy that determines whether you have reflection of a photon or absorption of a photon. And it was pretty funny because that's how I ended up finally getting a meeting with Alan Green. And then from that point forward, we were thick as thieves. So we were like partners in everything related to decryption and cryptography and cryptology. And, he's such an amazing person, and he gave the most incredible performance ever.
Oh, my gosh.
In the King's Chamber. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, I don't know if I can talk about that. That's one of the things I'm still trying to integrate. My God, what happened there? Yeah, I mean, the King's Chamber is one of the more difficult places in the world to be.
You think?
It is, difficult to climb up to. So you're climbing, up into this. But the thing that really makes the King's Chamber so challenging, I think, for most of us, is the heat. It's
so hot.
An inhumanly hot place, which makes absolutely no sense. Maybe you have some explanations for this, but the first time I went to the King's Chamber, it felt maybe 20, 40 degrees hotter than it did this time, but you're sitting in billion pounds of stone.
Yeah.
And stone, especially when placed on the surface of the earth, should always be at about 55 degrees. And so what phenomenon occurs in a pyramid to allow a chamber within that much thermal mass to hold such an extreme temperature makes absolutely no sense, because you're basically sitting in the middle of an air conditioner. And so, I don't know, you can reflect on that if you think you got some answers to that, but
I don't.
Picture being in one of this.
That's a good question, though.
Energetically impossible phenomenon. So you're in this massive stone that should have a temperature of 55 degrees, and yet you're in what feels like an oven with a weird amount of humidity in there, too, because it's not actually humid, but it's not dry. And so it's this weird zone in there. Feels musty. Oftentimes when I've been in there, it's just, you don't want to be in there. It smells bad. And we walked in this time, and there was almost a fragrance in the air in there. Like it was, and the air was moving, which again is impossible, but there was a very interesting air in that room. And we were all told that Alan was going to make a presentation. Didn't know what. And
even I was like, white knuckling it.
Yeah. To climb up into the King's Chamber, the man wears the one thing that would be impossible to wear into the King's Chamber, which is a white Victorian-esque tuxedo with the flourished, botanical front side to it, the whole thing. Like it's so, and a white top hat. And then he proceeds to somehow have carried up his laptop, a carrier for a platform for the laptop, and an innumerable amount of props that end up going into this next hour presentation. And in that time, he gives us his very first public performance of a script that came to him. Apparently is just a continuous download of information, but it's a discussion between basically God, Moses, and Shakespeare, and he plays all three parts simultaneously in this, what should be a monologue, feels like a trilogy of wit and performance that just
integrated with
music and props and like it's just like and
the history of the world.
Meanwhile, I can't even like breathe.
I
can't even I'm like slumped on the wall of the King's Chamber, and here's this guy like I'm just trying to figure out where he's getting so much energy from to do this performance for an hour. He's drenched to the bone, probably sweat out 3 gallons of liquids. I mean, the man was superhuman in that delivery. and it really began the week in such an interesting way. I mean, this was in some ways our beginning day, and we'd already been through a bunch of pyramids that day, and we were, I guess, 18 hours into many pyramids, and it was now 2:00 in the morning, and he finishes this performance. But I think that what I got from that experience, without having had time to integrate the whole journey yet, but Alan was showing us what it looks like to be ultimately the divine comedy, how to become the fool. That classic card in the deck, the fool, is such a overlooked aspect of divinity, I think, which is humor. And the freedom to express absolutely anything that comes through.
Yeah.
And so I think what he showed us in that performance, among many other wisdoms, is if you cannot find the jest in the sacred, you probably are missing the point of the sacred somehow, you know. And it's tempting, I think, especially there was a lot of people in the room that had never been to Egypt before, and here you are in the Great Pyramid of Giza for the first time. You're in the King's Chamber, and you have all this heady, maybe, expectation of what you're supposed to achieve or experience or whatever. And he just diffused all of that in that performance, reminding us with sunglasses that lit up in fluorescent patterns and all kinds of ridiculous things, that the closer you come to the sacred, the more loosely you need to hold the I guess, the gravity of your own belief system. You have to not even believe yourself in that moment. You have to have such a loose hand as you approach the true vibrations of truth. He showed us that we must have such hilarity over the frailty of the human experience that's about to be had, because the human just cannot, it's not a vessel capable of truly expressing the infinite.
Yeah.
And so you have to keep this sense of humor, this levity, this sense of vulnerability in the expression of being human, this finite thing that we call human that's about to experience the infinite. Wow. And that's, I think, ultimately maybe what every day in nature should be showing us is, dude, the second you take yourself seriously, the second you put any gravity on any emotion you might be feeling, or any thought you just had, or any new, discovery you feel like you just had, you just have to be in hilarity over it, because that thing predated you by so far. And it's just, we are, there's a great scripture that I love. It says that basically to be human is to see through the glass darkly. And the glass darkly is in a literal translation of what was thought to probably be the Aramaic for stained glass. So you can imagine the human condition is looking at reality through stained glass. Yeah. So all we can really see is little shadows and maybe a little bit of vague form, but we can't see how beautiful it is on the other side because the glass has been stained. And so I think that in a very beautiful, poetic, and absolutely humorous way, Alan's work there that night really just took me to my knees of any human, egoic part of that journey, that whatever you are about to experience, you will not have words for, and the words that will come to you will be so frail or so far from the full gravity of the truth that you need to remember to laugh. And dance, and just be in celebration of what you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, my favorite way of looking at the world is that I feel like the more I learn, the less I feel like I actually know. And that's kind of, maybe that is putting ourselves, as you say so eloquently, into the fool position, right? Which is, maybe that's part of the divine comedy in of itself. Maybe that is the purpose of it. And then after that, Alan's performance, which was the, pièce de résistance of perfection, there was a moment for me too, because I've seen Alan crash and burn. Like crash and burn on things that were supposed to be funny jokes. There was the time he played the heretical pope in my board meeting, which did not go like anything better than a lead balloon would go next to you. But I've never sweat so much in that moment than I did in that moment in my life. And but I was watching Alan do this, and it was hot in there, and I was like, okay, Alan, this is really, really, you've gone to great lengths to present something. And I couldn't resist the feeling that I had of some anxiety in a way. As you can imagine, it was so hot, it was dying in there. And he's like trying to get his thing straight, and his this, and that. And he and I have a standing like discussion all the time about, I always argue that perfection is the enemy of good enough, so it's just like go. And, but he and I work together so well. And I just looked at him and I said, you know what? I'm just going to love every single moment of this. And no matter what happens, it was as it was supposed to be.
It was perfect for its perfections and imperfections. Absolutely.
Oh, it was so beautiful. And about 10 minutes into it, and I started feeling, okay, this is good. This is really good. And then about 20 minutes into it, then he gets to the part where he plays the song, the da 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 da, and then all of a sudden I like look around and everyone's crying.
Yeah.
And it was like we laughed, we cried, I don't know how much money it was that we kissed goodbye, but it was an amazing treatise. It was this monologue or dialogue or trilogy, I'm not even sure what it was, of God conversing with himself in the king's chamber while wearing a white top hat and with all of his white hair and majestic beauty as he is. It was just an amazing experience. And that was the perfect precursor to what we experienced after, which I've never heard anything in my entire life like what we experienced in that night. And I remember standing there next to the sarcophagus, and something just hit me so powerfully, and I was just like, oh my gosh, we're in heaven. Did you feel that?
Yeah, when that vibration or thought hit me, it was a couple hours later when we were in yet another pyramid that night, and
With the Cafre?
we were in Cafre, and in the feminine energy of that
It was beautiful.
place, one of the women that was with our journey went through a cataclysmic, experience energetically and had a huge emotional release, and then she started singing.
That was incredible.
The voice that came through her that night is the closest I've heard in human body to, like you say, this is what another realm sounds like. This is, you use the word heaven, but really what you're speaking to, I guess, when I say that word now, it's to say that this is what it would feel and the sensory experience be if there was no alteration in the frequency of truth. And there's something about our planet in its position or its design or the nature of life as it's occurred on this planet that we sit behind that veil such that we do see through the glass darkly. We don't quite see the frequencies of truth purely, it feels, in our human experience yet. And yet there's these moments that pierce that so poignantly. And my gosh, did her voice pierce that night. So, and that was the first of 6 of the most epic days of my life. So, I mean, it was, I really have no words for how much beauty we got to witness that week. We watched so many humans pop through their ego shields into their most true perception and then expression of self. And there's just really nothing more beautiful than that, than we'll experience as humans. So grateful, very grateful.
Well, thank you.